Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to the second channel video. Today, Michelle O'Neill has made some history for becoming Northern Ireland's first minister, that is their highest position, the equivalent of a local prime minister, and it's not because she's the first woman to hold that role, but instead because she's the first nationalist to do the same. This is a very big deal because of the interesting definition of the word nationalist here, but it's also a big deal because it ends one of the biggest breaks of our government Northern Ireland has had, because you might assume that if there's a new leader, they just had an election, but actually that election was held in 2022, the 5th of May 2022, so it's been almost 2 years that Northern Ireland hasn't had a government, and so this is a big deal that not only have they elected their first nationalist, but also it took 2 years to do so, and also the way the government works is so wildly different to what you might expect, and I think it'd be a fun rundown because I think first things first, she is a nationalist, but usually when you hear the word nationalist, you assume they put that nation first. It means you are all about your nation above all others. However, in the case of Northern Ireland, it's not a nationalist for Northern Ireland, but instead we have Irish nationalists who are currently in charge, something which is very, very interesting, akin to, say, being in Flanders in Belgium and having a Dutch nationalist maybe for a prime minister, or the same for a region of Germany having a French nationalist. How does this happen? Let's talk about it a little bit today, because there is a world record that has been broken here. But first things first, I think we have to go into the fact that Northern Ireland has a very interesting system that basically comes from, at one point in time there were lots of bombs being dropped here, and arguably the very existence of Northern Ireland is controversial to some Irish people. And so I do need to approach this sensitively and say there are two different places on the island of Ireland. There is Ireland, which is a nation, a republic, and then there is Northern Ireland, which is a part of the United Kingdom. The fun thing is you can't even say what it really is, because if you Google Northern Ireland, it says it's a UK constituent country. If you ask Wikipedia, on the other hand, they say, they use the correct terminology of it's a part of the United Kingdom. It is variously described as a country, and some official ministers from the UK will say that. That's what we're taught in schools, but calling it a country is a little bit misleading, which is why it's like, they have like a devolved government, and they don't really have a flag. There's a lot of fun things about them. So Northern Ireland is a part of the United Kingdom. What type of part? Don't ask that question. And they have one of the funkiest governments that is headquartered here in Belfast, their capital, if you were to call it a capital. And so the interesting thing about how government works in Northern Ireland is because the very existence of Northern Ireland to begin with as a separate state from regular Ireland, you might say. Maybe we've got Ireland and Ireland Light for the sake of this video, or Diet Ireland maybe. So the basic, is that offensive actually? So basically Diet Ireland is very, very controversial as an existence to begin with. A lot of people want full fat Ireland there, none of this low sugar stuff, and so a lot of people were willing to bomb to get this objective, something that people living in Northern Ireland and perhaps the UK weren't too fond of. And so in the 90s we agreed a big power sharing agreement, which means that even though now there is a first minister, there's a devolved government, etc., it's not elected in the normal way, but instead, first of all, you can see here it's a additional member system, I believe. They've got one of the quirky systems where no vote goes to waste, because if people have their votes wasted, they might start car-bombing people. And the second reason is because of, obviously, they've got the fun vote sharing system and everyone gets their vote counted. But then once the election results come in, if you allowed one party to rule based on being the biggest, well, all the people who had their votes come second, they might start car-bombing people. So here's the alternative Northern Ireland goes for. If you look at the biggest parties in Northern Ireland, you can see no party ever wins a majority. There are two main factions. There is nationalist and non-nationalist, or you might say unionist or nationalist, to be clear there, Irish Republican or unionist perhaps. But basically there are two major factions of parties, but there are lots of different parties that make up those various factions because of the electoral system. And so the fun thing about this government is, even though it's headed by Michelle O'Neill, a Irish Republican, if you look at the people who have been announced for it, it's like, okay, so this is Sinn Féin, her party, who's going to be the infrastructure minister, whereas if we look at the agriculture and environment minister, that's Alliance Party member. If you look at the finance minister, it's going to be it says Sinn Féin. If you look at the health minister, it's an Ulster Unionist Assembly member, which is the third or fourth biggest party. And then you've got DUP for the communities portfolio. Basically, every member of the government is agreed on both sides that the biggest parties work together. And it also means that there's a weird quirky thing of like being the leader of the opposition is a very powerful role too. And so SLDP going to opposition is actually a good thing for them. They're going to pick up £80,000 for their additional duties on the front bench, and they set the business for the first 10 days, which is actually for 10 days total, which is a very, very big deal if you think about it. And so as a result, Northern Ireland has a system where if you get MLAs, the members of the Northern Ireland Assembly, what does the L stand for actually? But if you get these members of the assembly, then you have some power, no matter how small. It's one of the biggest consensus-based politics systems in the world, solely because the alternative is, I don't know, someone's car going off a little bit, but then actually having a lot of people dead in it. And so, yeah, this is a very quirky system, you might say. I would go as far as to say it's very quirky. And so, one of the weird things about all of the consensus that's required is it means it takes a very long time to get a government. In fact, if you look at it, the election was held in, again, just to remind you, May of 2022, and it's normal for coalition-based governments to take sometimes weeks or months to form, but for it to be that long is very, very unique, I think it's fair to say. I checked the Guinness World Record, and it belongs to Belgium, who had it for 541 days of no government. They have a kind of devolved system where the regions of Belgium still could hold, pass laws, etc. But there was just a caretaker government making sure that things ticked over for the full 541 days, which was previously held by Cambodia for 354 days. And then, fun fact, even though the Guinness World Records does not show it here, there was a period where Belgium in 2020, during the coronavirus pandemic, actually had an even longer period with no government. It's very, very fun. Belgium just decides it doesn't want a government sometimes, and it means they can't pass major bills, but yeah, who's even caring what's going on in Belgium? And so, the interesting equivalent here is what happened with Northern Ireland, you might be wondering, and so I searched it up. There's a fun website that is How Long Has Northern Ireland Not Had a Government.com, and they tell you that as of yesterday, it was 728 days with a 9 million bill. All of the MLAs are still getting paid their full salary because they're not part of the government, but they are being elected, and so it costs them 10 million to have zero governments. Fun fact, if you go on the website now, it's been 0 days. They've had a government for the whole 0 days. It's exciting. The website's going to be, the salary is actually going to go to pay people to make laws at some point, presumably. However, the sad, depressing thing here is the Guinness World Records have confirmed that they are not eligible because the UK does pass some laws on their behalf. Very, very sad, I know. Northern Ireland is not going to be having a Guinness World Record, which would be kind of fitting if there was going to be a Guinness World Record. It feels like this island right here is the one that should perhaps have it, except that is a controversial thing to say. To say that people in Northern Ireland, sorry about that, to say that people in Northern Ireland are Irish on any level, I mean, it's half of the title of their country, but to say they're Irish is actually quite the take, right? And so one of the things that I think a lot of people will jump onto is saying, well, now they've got an Irish nationalist government, now that they've got a majority of people there who are nationalists, actually it means that the unification of the two countries is a given, it's happening, it's a fact, and that is something that could have some truth to it. But I personally, again, I'm someone who doesn't try to jump into things of like, so often on this channel and over the course of the discussions we've had over the course of this channel's history, people have been like, yeah, 5 years, this is definitely happening. I remember people said, yeah, after Brexit, Scotland's leaving like next year maybe. I have not seen an independent Scotland yet. The same is true for many other places around the world. Even Greenland, which keeps begging for its independence. It's a point for another time. But countries will talk about independence, and people who like independence movements are like, yeah, viva la revolution. But it doesn't mean that it actually happens or that it makes sense. And so Northern Ireland, there are 3 variables to look at. One is who are they electing? This is the fun electoral map, and you can see that although 29% of people pick Sinn Féin over the Democratic Unionist Party, actually more and more the biggest gains from this election seemed like they went to the Alliance Party. They are, besides the TUV, the Trade Unionist, yep, voice of course, but besides the Trade Unionist Party, which picked up 1 seat, and it looks like the People Before Profit Party, which lost some votes there, but they are the biggest gainers from this election, and their effective platform is saying, okay, there are 2 factions in Northern Irish politics, and it's dumb. We spend all our time talking about whether we want to be part of the UK or part of Ireland. How about we start by talking about how we make effective governance, and that is a message that is picking up with people. They almost doubled their seats from a 4.5% swing right there. That is a big sign that Northern Ireland might be moving away from the idea of like, do we have to be nationalists or not? They do have still a lot of people going there, but if the biggest growth is to parties who are not part of that, I mean, even the Trade Unionist voice, they're saying, yeah, I care about unions more than I care about the union, is perhaps a big opinion. And so if we look at that and we compare it with this is the districts of Northern Ireland, with blue representing places where they call themselves British and green representing places where they call themselves Irish. The people in green, in other words, feel like, oh, I'm part of Ireland, I'm Irish, but I'm living in the wrong country. I just feel like we have to join together. That's my best Irish accent. And the people in the blue are like, oh, wait, no, I can't do a British accent. I already am British. The people in the blue are like, yeah, actually, we are a special part of the United Kingdom. That is the important status that we should continue to maintain. And so a lot of people look at this and they go, oh, yeah, that is a place that is bound for conflict. But what this really comes down to, because if you look at, say, Fermanagh over here, or Armagh over here, they are both places that are British majorities, very, very slim British majorities. If you look at the actual kind of further breakdown, you can see that there are Irish nationalist areas and British nationalist areas. However, they still vote in a majority for the Irish nationalist parties. 3 members there are belonging to those parties. And so when you kind of break it down like that, you see that there are quite a few people who are voting across the spectrum to what they believe in that sense of the word. And especially as you get to the British nationalist bits, more and more people around Belfast are just like, yeah, it doesn't actually matter when we live here. Like, we have full free access to Ireland and the UK. Why does it matter? It's an increasingly strong opinion, except if you're if you're religious, which is where the real divide comes in. The reason you see the nationalist graph basically align with this one near perfectly is because of the fact that, yeah, actually what is happening is, like many other parts of the world, there is a big substitution here where politics is an allowed arena, right? It is okay, it is in fact encouraged that we should debate the merits of political parties. That's what campaigning is. And so campaigning becomes a stand-in for identity, and identity, if you think about it, is a stand-in for religion. The United Kingdom, we went back and forth a few times, but the UK moved to being a Protestant country somewhere in the 15 or 1600s, which means that we've had a very long period of that, whereas Ireland never made that same move. They believe the Pope is number one. Just to clarify, I'm legally a Catholic, so that's my bias on this one, but Irish people believe the Pope is number one, and I'm also Irish, so I'm allowed to make these comments and be offensive. The Pope is number one. He should be telling us what to do. What's this God thing? I think we listen to God through the Pope. That man who lives in the weird, like that weird exclave of Rome, he is the one who gets to decide how religion works. And that is the majority of what my fellow countrymen believe. And so as a result of that weird little quirk, there is a bizarre religious difference which actually underpins the nationalist difference, which underpins the voting difference. And if you think about it, it's funny because the big conflict in the world right now, I'm not gonna talk about it too much, but you heard what's going on over here? I think what's happening is people take a issue, which is actually a straight up, there is a violence-based thing, and that violence comes from history, and that history comes from demographics, and that demographics comes from religion. And so people can take any one of those issues, and particularly politics, because the politics of certain religions being liked or disliked really has a big thing there. People will take that any one side of that 5-sided conflict, and they will be like, yes, here are my real strong beliefs. And that is basically what happens in Northern Ireland too. What is actually the future of these two places though? You can determine it by looking at any one of these graphs. Well, people are getting more Catholic. Catholic people breed more than Protestants. People are slowly losing their British identity in certain areas, and people are slowly voting less and less for the Democratic Unionist Party, the traditional biggest party in the area. But even though the nationalists are voting less and less for the moderate nationalists, you might say, the SLDP, and instead voting for the hardline nationalists, these are all signs that things are moving in one direction, but they're also an incomplete picture, right? I think the demographic change will give you a good vibe for how things go if people stay religious. The ultimate, and that's where this gets spicy. If everyone stays engaged in how to actually improve things within the current system, things will get better for right now, but the overarching goal does not change. This is the spicy take that I want to have in today's video. It's something that's been on my mind a lot because of how many day-to-day conversations I see with Stars of Davids and weird Arab flags that people have made their identity for this little hot flash in the pan here. But as people are doing this more and more, you start to try and only reach absolute solutions that ignore the real needs of the people at the time. There are humanitarian disasters and people shooting each other, and that is a big deal, right? The fact that we have escaped that in Northern Ireland means it doesn't matter what happens with the place. I think the people of Northern Ireland get to decide first, and then second, the UK or Ireland, if there is a change in its status, whoever is going to take it from then on out then should decide, like, do we definitely want them? And that's going to be the actual interesting part of this story. Can Northern Ireland govern itself effectively enough that Ireland actually wants it? There is ultimately a gap in most people would agree if they live in Ireland that because of their big, fun government activities with corporations, that Ireland is a very, very successful country in terms of GDP per capita, and Northern Ireland would track that down. Northern Ireland's biggest benefits kind of come from the UK government as a whole. There is a huge fiscal transfer that happens there. Is Ireland comfortable stepping in to do that, especially because no matter when you do the transfer, no matter how you do it, there will always be Protestants or British people or unionist voters within your country. How do you effectively integrate those people with open arms as opposed to recreating the same conflict but on the other side? And that's what you really need. Again, if you imagine the exact same thing but with this area, how would you do the same thing there? The having a big overarching, like the same with if Russia just took all of Ukraine, right? If Ukraine took all of Russia, in any conflict, even if you get your biggest goal that for some reason you think is undeniable and must come at all costs, then actually you will end up in a situation where you're going to create the opposite situation against you, and we should ideally be against endless cycles of violence. I think that the only correct opinion is that the Northern Irish people get to decide, and then secondly, it's kind of like you have a child, right? That child gets to decide where he's going to live, but he doesn't get to decide he's going to live in people's houses without their permission. And that's vaguely where my opinion on Northern Ireland is. It is a part of the UK that most people don't think about on a day-to-day basis, but it's a part of the UK I wish well, and I hope that the new Prime Minister is good. I don't care if she is good. I hope that whether the people in the government are... Also, by the way, here's the fun thing. They've got one party, two party, three party... it's just four parties, actually. I said the fifth party is in opposition, but they've got four separate parties making up their government. I hope they do a good job at governing before anything else, and I hope that that's what everyone who looks at this video is, but I'm just kidding. If you read the comments, there's going to be a cesspool of nationalist craziness, and so let's pick a side on this one. I think Northern Ireland should go ahead and join the Middle East. I think we should just cut them out, make a big canal, get it on a boat, maybe get like a tugboat attached, and just sail it right in here where Cyprus exists. It would fit perfectly in the region. It's got the ethno-nationalist religious conflict. I'm just saying, if we could do that, we'd solve the problem. So let me know what you think about my idea in the comments down below, because for now, second channel, I've got to be out at dinner in like 5 minutes. So goodbye.